Welcome to Just Rest, burnout tips for everyday radicals who are tired but not giving up. I'm your host, Nicole Havelka, bringing you tips and inspiration to help you feel seen and supported on your radical rest journey. Let's go. Hey, Rest Rebels. I am beyond excited to introduce you to Ixchel Lunar, an Indigenous time ecologist who talks to us about decolonizing time. So don't get too bristly. I know sometimes that word can cause some consternation in some, especially folks who are white-bodied like me, but don't miss this conversation because we talk about honoring our body, honoring the land and natural cycles in the way we manage time and the way we relate to time, rather than the hustle and bustle and using our energy and our flow in service of extractive work in toxic capitalism. And of course, giving you insights into someone who has done remarkable activism work and who has shifted their activism into the ways that they show up in the world. So I'm not going to talk any longer. I want you to be able to dive in to this fantastic conversation with Ixchel Lunar. I am beyond thrilled to be bringing you our next guest today, who is Ixchel Lunar, who I have discovered through podcasts initially. And I know when I heard a podcast with them with our mutual friend and colleague, Becky Mollenkamp, I don't know, at least a year and a half ago, I was like, oh, this is a person I need to know more about. So when they agreed to be on the podcast and be part of these first few episodes, I was just absolutely over the moon. So I'm excited to bring them to you today. So Ixchel is an Indigenous time ecologist, writer, and ancestral medicine guide known for decolonizing time. They help passionate creators and revolutionary leaders, the kind of people I'm hoping are listening to this podcast, help you all break free from the capitalist grind to reclaim time, realign energy, reconnect with your creative flow. They do that by blending ancestral wisdom, modern neuroscience, and somatic practices with the technologies of personal cosmology, including Mayan Cholki, human design and astrology. And Ixchel guides visionary misfits in reshaping their relationship with time, creativity, and in innate rhythms. Oh, all of that sounds fantastic. My body is like relaxing even just hearing and saying those words. So a former vice mayor and activist, they champion decolonial leadership and Indigenous land stewardship, offering transformative guidance for those seeking liberation beyond the clock. And their trauma-aware, culturally rooted approach helps people move through burnout, which we talk about a lot here, and cultural disconnection by returning to ancestral reverence, relational ritual, and cyclical spiral time. Thank you so much for joining me, Ixchel. I'm delighted. What would you add to that introduction?
Oh my gosh, that was a lot. I don't know. I
It's
think
a lot.
Yeah, I'd probably just let it land. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. That's totally cool. So before we head into my first question, what I'm thinking that I will do with you and my other guest is maybe pause and take a moment for a breath. Just one deep breath. And y'all who are listening can do it with us too. And an exhale. And I know that when I do that, I feel completely different. And it's really needed for me today because you can probably hear it a little bit in my voice that I'm still recovering from a cold or sinus infection or whatever this thing is that I've got it. So welcome, Ixchel. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you.
So if you're comfortable with it, I really want to delve a little bit into your story and how you evolved into becoming a time ecologist, having this passion and this work and this vision. And one of the kind of related stories that I know this is true for those of us who work in the area of burnout is that often, though this may not be the case, it's rooted in some kind of burnout story. Like we often have our own of how that worked for us. And so I'm wondering if you would take a moment and share whatever part of that journey you feel comfortable sharing today. I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely a few threads that really weave together that sort of landing in this practice of what I'm helping others to do that come from burnout, from autistic burnout, from sort of biohacker culture and flow, and really the process of deconstructing all of that and what the roots of all of that were in order to like really fully figure out how to recover and how to move forward. I have a very long political background and also a tech background. And so both of those are cultures that are heavily hustle and very much in denial of the physical body and the needs of the body and that sort of thing. And so it was no accident that I would go through multiple cycles of burnout. And I did a lot of political activism in my 20s and 30s, and then went into running for office, ran once, didn't make it, ran again, made it. It was in a really difficult time, 2008 into 2013. That whole time period really changed politics, actually. So it was the housing crisis and the bailouts and all of that was going on, really seeing how being in office, campaigning, fundraising, which Citizens United happened in 2010 11, that completely changed the landscape of funding so that everything became about funding and not really about values and showing up for the people. It was this very, very sad and just to see all of that sort of collapse in real time and be, part of that landscape. I ran for Congress. I didn't make it. I lost my seat on council. And that was, I think, the first really big burnout that I experienced. It was like I had been doing all the things. There were so many plates spinning. I was on tons of committees because other people weren't taking them. There's different spots that you can take and be a part of regionally. And up in my neck of the woods, folks weren't really taking the opportunity to do them. And so I was like, we need representation in these. This is money for our community. We need to have presence there. And so I really felt like being a Gen Xer, being the oldest girl, those were things that it's like unpaid labor that I was conditioned to take on as well. So when I lost my seat, the region lost me as a representative for a lot of those things as well. And so I was heartbroken for my community because that was important. And I had brought a lot of money to the community in being in those positions. And so that was a very devastating time. Then after Obama left office and was starting to leave office, then the Hillary campaign started ramping up. And someone who had known me from politics convinced me to help her organize campaign support, voluntary campaign support. Mm-hmm. It took some roping. I was I was done. I had really pulled myself out of a lot of that because it was so physically draining. Mm-hmm. And it was all voluntary. Even when I was in office, it was voluntary. I got healthcare coverage, which was amazing because I didn't have healthcare, but it was really difficult. And I said yes, and then helped to create a really solid campaign structure. Of course, Hillary continued, went on to the general election and got roped in again. We ended up creating the second largest call center in the United States for her campaign. We were doing 50,000 calls in a weekend. It was really big. And the reason that was possible was because I had such a huge network from having done all of that regional politicking, running for Congress up and down the Northern California, actually, and knew so many rich white women That whole area is very much, huge in terms of that particular demographic. And so was able to call in people who had time and who were really committed and had something at stake in that campaign. And unfortunately, we know what happens at the end of that. The signs were there, though. There were some weird things that were happening. The database had been corrupted. We think it was a Russian hack. The callers were getting a weird, automated voicemail that was in Russian when they would call numbers. It was weird, but nobody wanted to talk about it. We couldn't talk about it because the campaign doesn't want people to know they've been hacked. It ended up coming. It's out there. It was creepy.
Right?
It was so creepy.
I'm a fan of sci-fi and fantasy kind of shows and novels, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that feels like an episode of the X-Files almost.
It was definitely, it was so bizarre. And just the silence of it also was weird. And then come election eve, we all were so hopeful. And we had this room of 50, mostly white women again, just so excited. And when the results came in, it was nonstop tears. And I was just whoa. After having gone through that experience of that unsteadiness about what was happening internally with the campaign, some of the warning signs that we had seen, the hacks and things like that had happened, my nervous system just went bonkers. I felt so unsafe knowing what was coming in terms of that first 4 years of this regime. I just felt completely unsafe and totally exhausted. And so we decided to leave the United States. And I spent the next 8 weeks preparing for that. And that was the last of what my body had to give. And then I just went through a complete crash. And it took me a couple of years to really start to even cope and get by again. It was a pretty big crash. And I was going through perimenopause and, really getting a sense of what my autism, ADHD was all about. And that opened up an entire new world for me in terms of really being able to understand everything that my body had been going through and what I had been putting it through for decades.
And I'm someone who has definitely lived in a lot of intense circumstances too, but that's rolling from one very personal campaign and a campaign loss into just another major operation, right? And almost, at the time, unthinkable loss.
There was so much at stake because I hadn't been able to get hired. I was of age, right? In your 40s, you become of age where you start to become unhireable. And after everything I had put into my community, to have my community basically turn its back was also a pretty big loss. And so I had hoped that with her win, there would be something that I could figure out, a paid position of some kind. Our campaign was so good that we got invited to a special audience with her and got to meet her, and we were appreciated for the work that we were doing. It was really exciting, to think that maybe I could eventually have something where I would get paid. And we were just really running out of money at that point, and the economy was really difficult in the North Bay. Yeah, so it was a big loss. It's definitely a big loss. Yeah.
Yeah. So you go from writing all of that adrenaline, right?
Right.
And being on that roller coaster to then stopping and saying, I'm done. So what does that look, and how do you reclaim both your nervous system, your own body? How do you reclaim that and then forge a different way? Where did you find that?
It was, again, through a lot of lived experience. So really going through the whole arc of burnout and recovery, figuring out what my body needed, really understanding what an adrenalized body is, and learning what an unadrenalized body is while figuring out trauma, right? There's the trauma piece of it that also keeps us very adrenalized as well. And having moved to Nicaragua, really wanting to understand what revolutions are as part of the work that I've been doing on the book that I'm writing about decolonizing time, was to then get a front row seat to what an actual collapse and dictatorship look like. And so to really experience all of that in a lived experience that I wasn't expecting to have a front row seat to, I thought I had left that potential dictatorship and was coming to a safe place. And no, that was not what was happening.
Yeah.
So, yeah, being able to really get a sense of that, I was able to start to share what I was seeing happening on the ground there with what would become what the United States has been going through. And a lot of it was not heard, unfortunately. Being able to really start to do that de-adrenalizing was the biggest thing to the healing process that I had spent decades trying to deal with my trauma, and learning how to de-adrenalize in a way that's safe. Because we do, when we're traumatized, we stay in that adrenalized place. And being able to have ways to support the body in de-adrenalizing, especially through soluble fiber. I talk about this quite a bit with my clients, to really bring in soluble fiber to help the body to de-adrenalize and start to feel safe in slowing down. If we can't feel safe in slowing down, the body will not do it.
I'm remembering that for myself. So that's probably part of the reason I brought you here. I'm like, there's things I need to learn from you, things that I can do for my own body, because I'm in one of those phases too, where I'm sort of recovering from a really stressful time. And like, what is it like to be out of that body that's just, wants to push you?
And a culture that wants to push us. Yep.
Totally. And I push back against that all the time. But then what does that mean in our bodies? Like, how do we help our bodies do that? Like you said, live in that unadrenalized state, because few of us probably have much experience with that. Honestly, I think the only thing I'm grateful, just for my own experience, one thing I'm grateful for is that I found yoga and meditation pretty early in my life. So then my body has had experiences of deep relaxation and like deep rest because of that.
Even yoga, though, Western yoga can be super problematic. I did yoga teacher training in a decolonial setting and really started to understand where, even with yoga, I was pushing perfection onto my body to do certain things that it actually, as someone with hyper Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and mobility and flexibility issues, like, I had to really unpack that and shift what I was doing with that too. So yeah, I just always like to bring that in, because we do lean on yoga in so many different ways, but putting someone in yoga in the wrong setting can be even more harmful. So I always like to caution folks around like who they're finding to work with yoga.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And one of the gifts of my early practices that I happened to find randomly in the Chicago suburbs, a woman who was teaching yoga, who's a white woman from the US, but who had learned in India. Like, so all of her teacher training was there. And though she had a very physical practice, like, she approached it very differently because of that. So I was always aware, unlike a lot of people in the US, and this is just a gift. This isn't like anything special about me. This was a gift the universe gave me, right?
Yeah.
That I was like aware that there was so much more to this cultural and spiritual tradition than what you get in a yoga studio, where it's like about getting a tight butt and into like, $150 yoga pants.
Yeah.
That none of us actually need, quite frankly.
Buff arms. Yeah.
But I want good arms. Exactly.
Have you heard of Octavia Rahim?
No, say more.
Octavia Rahim is a yoga instructor who focuses on restorative yoga. And I just love to recommend her work for folks that are going through burnout recovery, as a way to layer in really restorative and restful practices.
Nice.
Beautiful works. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I will look that up and link to it in the show
Beautiful.
notes. And as a teacher, mostly what I teach now is restorative yoga. So
Nice.
any new things that I can learn about doing that, I'm always game.
I
For
just
that.
started restorative yoga here in Coatepec. It's just been phenomenal. Every day I do it, I'm expecting like all that soreness and pain and everything, and it never shows up. And I'm like, wow, this is really different. Like, this
Yeah.
is so different.
Right.
I feel like stronger and more stable. I almost slipped the other day and I caught myself. I didn't fall, which was like, for me, this is huge because I fell in 4 years ago. I slipped, fell, and crushed my spine. And I was actually during my yoga teacher training and had to stop all. I was like physically unable to do any of that for quite a while. So,
Wow.
yeah, restorative yoga is phenomenal.
It is. It is. It's the bomb. So if there's even more to that, I mean, honestly, that practice is what taught me how to rest. It's what taught me how to ask for what I need. It's taught me so many things about my body and what it needs, and it generally isn't anymore. And I'm also at a different age. When I was at a different age, the more I sometimes tell people, the more physical practice really served me at a time. And as my body has aged, I've had injuries, and just like you said, going through perimenopause and all of that now, like your body just needs a different pace, a different rhythm, and a different kind of support. So I also care less now about doing things like, getting handstands or whatever I used to do. And again, some of that served me for a while. Like there was some really important things I learned about my body and claiming my body. But on the other hand, there were also other things about it that, that pushing, that driving yourself to achieve in a class is just so
Perfect
antithetical.
pose. Yeah.
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that it feels so good to not teach that way anymore. And I don't think I ever taught that way entirely, but I've completely changed how I language and give people lots of options when I teach and things like that
Nice.
very few people taught me how to do. Like a lot of it I've learned how to do, but then I've also been lucky enough to have some teachers recently who have, I just think that's been more explored now in the
Yeah.
West anyway. How do you make this accessible for all kinds of different bodies? Yoga is a great way to talk also about like, so what were some of I know delving into some spiritual and cultural lineages for you was a part of that recovery. And I would love to hear more about how that came to be and then how that weaves into your work now with your clients.
Yeah. My lineages are very interesting. There was both the ancestral work that I was really diving into, and then there was a lot of deconstruction around some of my own studies in grad school. So I went to California Institute of Integral Studies, which is kind of East meets West in terms of philosophy, cosmology, consciousness. That was what my degree was in. So I was studying astrology with Rick Tarnas and Stan Groff, who, is like, one of the grandfathers of the psychedelic therapy movement. They weaved in those two things together in their work. And then I was studying Buddhism. Actually, if I had gone on with my PhD, I had been accepted to do, I would have gone very deep in Buddhism, working with Joanna Macy, who was my mentor and was going to sit on and chair my thesis, and had studied with some really incredible Eastern Buddhists there versus more of the Western, but I also had been exposed to some Western Buddhism as well. And when I moved to Nicaragua and was starting to do that ancestral work, really reconnecting with my own ancestors and my own lineage on my abuelita, my grandmother's side, that's when I started to really work with the Mayan Cholki, the calendar, which is the energy of the day. And that system was quite fascinating. I had learned about it when I was little, but never really understood it from a grown-up perspective. And so I was really able to start to understand that and track the energy of the day in my daily life, and have been doing that for, gosh, about 8 years now. Just every evening, sitting with the energy of the day that is coming, and then noticing where that energy of the day shows up each day. And that's a daily practice that has really been helpful for me to ground and observe and start to connect with the land and the world around me. Buddhism and presence and those things are also, I think, a deeper part of the work that I do. That piece around interbeing that Joanna Macy works with, as well as like Thich Nhat Hanh, has been another teacher in that realm as well. And yeah, so those are some of the lineages that I've been able to work with and play with as well. I also have more on sort of the neuroscience side, folks that I also really needed to unpack and deconstruct a little bit. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and flow was something that was always a really big interest when his book came out in the early 90s. When I went into my graduate work, I was really interested in neuroscience and consciousness. And so Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and some other folks in the consciousness studies realm were of interest to me, very much in that sort of Western thinking. And so to start to understand flow from a more decolonial practice, not in the sort of biohacking way that was so much a part of the tech scene, using flow to hustle, to have better productivity, all of those ways of using flow that were so harmful, both to the body, but also to the relationship with flow itself, which is such a beautiful thing. Stephen Kotler, I studied with Stephen Kotler and did a flow certification with him, and really started to understand the flow cycle itself, but realized in my own work that flow doesn't start with the struggle and hustle. It really starts with rest. And so my own work has been about sort of claiming that place of rest as the place where we start to be able to have our relationship with flow deepen and have it be a really beautiful practice and place where we can support our body of work, but from a place that's not destructive to the body. Yeah.
And we can talk more about this a little bit later too, that I love having these tangible practices that you can do, like that, taking that little bit of time, right, to really tune into your body and where is your energy is such a huge gift, it feels like to me. I mean, the more that I do these practices and do this work, the more important I feel like it is for us to take moments to really feel in and tap into our body and what it needs in any given moment. And then not only learning how to tap into it, which is something in Western culture that we simply do not do, period. We don't do it because we're going to be in the flow so that we can do the 75,000 things, right? That we need to do or think we need to do or someone else is telling us to do. But our bodies tell us and are magically wise, right? Or not even magically. They're built and designed to be very wise about what they need and they don't. I sometimes, when I'm teaching, training people, I'll say things like, like babies seem to know like what they need. They know when they need to eat. They know when they need to sleep. And there is no stopping it when, like that's why new parents, I'm not a parent, but that, when people are new parents, they're like, this is a whole different, they end up having a whole different relationship with time, right? In part because the baby knows what it needs when it needs it. And there's just no negotiating, right? There's, you're going to give the baby what the baby needs at the time they need it, whether our clock says it's time or not. It's going to do what it needs to do. And so we come built in with that wisdom. is what I say. Like, but somewhere along the line, we get
forget.
disconnected. We forget.
We get conditioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We get conditioned
Forget.
to do something else. Exactly. So decolonizing time is just such a provocative phrase that I've enjoyed reading your Substack on for quite a while now, that I've been reading and been a fan. So tell us a little bit, or tell me a little bit, and whoever's listening out there, how has time been colonized, particularly in the West, although it probably spills in other places? And this is such a big question, but then how do we even begin to decolonize it in ourselves? Because, like we were just saying, we come with this very innate wisdom in our bodies and in our cultural practices, but that we get disconnected from. So, what does that mean? And how can we do something differently?
On the very simplest level, I like to sort of frame colonial time and decolonial time in a somatic way. Colonial time, and this is very high level, and we can go deeper into the ways that time has been colonized. But at a very simple level, the way that time has been colonized is through separation of ourselves from the land and ourselves with other people, so that we really negate our needs, right? And the way that we can decolonize time is to come back in relationship. So colonial time severs, and decolonizing restores relationship. So it's just a very easy way to sort of come at that, because I know that for a lot of white people in particular, when they even hear the word colonial or decolonial, they brace because they're expecting to feel guilty about something because that's how this works and how folks kind of come at the process of anti-racism, decolonization, all of the sort of characteristics of white supremacy, those kinds of things. There tends to be a bracing. And so I really like to name that for folks and to bring people back to what their bodies are seeking in the process of doing this work. Because above all else, above the harm and the repair work that needs to happen, we have to deal with our bodies and what's happening with our bodies in relationship to ourselves and to the world around us. And so I really like to simplify it in that way first, so that people understand that the repair work is such a beautiful thing, not like another thing that we have to put on our task list and check off, but like actual relationship, and looking at that as something beautiful instead of something that has to be done.
Yeah. So on your website, you have this great page describing the 5 stages of decolonization, and you may use that in other places as well. I'm curious to know more about that and how that factors into this process we're talking about.
That's a great one. I was just looking up the pronunciation of the author that I referred to on that page. It's Hawaiian, so forgive me if I butcher this. La'inui. La'inui, I think, is the pronunciation of that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a great article, if folks want to go deeper, that I link to on that page about the 5 stages of decolonization. But he's really taking it in terms of a collectivist or cultural lens. And so when we talk about decolonial work, we start with ourselves and our bodies. And then there's a sort of a rippling out and connecting that more to the whole. But none of us can show up to this work unless we started to do some internal repair first. Because if we show up in collectivist situations and we haven't done that repair, we're just going to be repeating some of these same kinds of patterns. So I always kind of like to couch that in terms of that. And in terms of those 5 stages, I really take that work from a process of remembering. And so doing that somatic work is that process of remembering. really connecting back to the body. And when we do that, we start to do that de-adrenalization, that figuring out how to rest when it doesn't feel like we're supposed to because we're so conditioned. There's a lot of grief that happens when we start to really understand the way all of these systems are working against us and keeping us in a particular place of supporting white supremacy culture and dominator culture. There's a lot of grief. And so to be able to be okay with that grieving process, that's another place where people brace or they run, they bolt.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways that we kind of can look at how our body is reacting to that deconstructive work. So being able to notice that, have awareness for that, and give space for the grieving process instead of bypassing it, which our culture can be so good at bypassing. Right.
Yeah, we do have exceptional skills in the West and in the US in particular at bypassing the unpleasant.
And then, once we start doing that work, there's almost like a void. We start to realize there's this void. There's this emptiness in our lives of well, then what? And so a lot of times when folks are starting to realize how colonial time has impacted them and all the various ways it's been stolen, it's been commoditized. I have a list of ways that I've talked about in other settings, but when we start to realize all the different systems that are in place that have taken our time from us, and we very much want to be in decolonized time or in relational time and spiral, indigenous, cyclical time, which is the reframe of what time can feel like, we start to see there's this huge void. And that's because we all need to dream. We need to dream a new way of being. And that's talked about in that article. And that also is both an internal, but it's an external collective way of being. How can we be with each other? And how can we dream new ways of being with each other? And that's what kind of helps to fill that void, that once we start to deconstruct all those colonial ways of being, we have to address that void. And we do that through dreaming. And then that's where, when you start to feel into those new ways of being, you commit to a new rhythm. And that's a lot of work because the old ways of being very much are going to push. They're going to push on us about how we think we should be. And then we move into a more sort of what Biohacking calls a post-activist way of being. And it's a place of fugitivity. So Biohacking is someone that I reference quite a lot. I've done a lot of work with him and his communities. And that place of fugitivity is one of living outside of those colonial structures and figuring out how we're going to live ways of being. And I think that we are all making this up as we go along, and that's okay. It took us 500 years to get to where we are in colonial living, and figuring out how we are going to live outside of those structures and create new ways of being that are post-capitalist, right? Nobody knows how to do that anymore.
Right.
The very few Indigenous communities around the world who are still living on the land, protecting the land, doing all of that unpaid labor, protecting the sovereign lands that still exist, they know some ways, and we can definitely take some pointers from them. But in terms of all of the cultural structures that we have, it's a big unknown, and we have to be able to figure that out together.
Yeah. What came to mind, especially when you started talking about this being post-activism, right? You go from being someone who's, fist in the air trying to change the system.
Reform it somehow.
Reform it, change it. And not bad. That's not a bad thing necessarily. But you go from that to saying, no, I'm going to simply live the new reality. I'm going to embody the new reality, even though I'm not quite sure what it is. But if I listen to my body, if we listen to those Indigenous voices, people who are still practicing this connection with the land, with natural rhythms, we can figure it out. I mean, I think the wisdom is in there somewhere, right?
Yep.
And that probably isn't all that far removed. But like you said, our ancestors have spent 500 years pulling themselves away from those rhythms. And
Yeah.
so it'll take some time to reconstruct that. And what does this world look like? But that also gives me hope that's possible. That there
I think
is a vision.
it lets us breathe a little bit too. We get to exhale because we are in a middle generation of many that are going to be figuring this out. And a lot of us want to be in this new way of being and the old way's done. And while there are some of those revolutionary shifts where things can change on a dime, and we always leave open the possibility for that, for the most part, we are in one of many generations, and the Indigenous communities know how this works as well. They talk about 7 and 14 generations to have any kind of lasting change, because our bodies have to really sit with that and take that in. And we have intergenerational trauma that has to be unwrapped and dissolved as well. And so it gives the ability to sort of exhale that it's not all on us, but we are a huge part of it. And that lets us sort of live in that Nepantla that I talk about, which is a term from Gloria Ansel, who wrote the book Borderlands and Borderlands La Frontera. She really talks about that in between and learning to be able to be comfortable in that in between of Nepantla. So Nepantla is that space between two worlds. It's a very liminal space. And that's not comfortable for the most part for people, but it's a place that we really have to start being comfortable with. De-adrenalizing helps that.
Yeah, right? For sure. I would just say that if any of the listeners out there have questions about this, or if you have experiences of living time in your body differently, I would love to hear from you. So you can email me at defythetrend@gmail.com, or on the website, there's a place you can click and record a question for a future episode or something. I would love to hear more from that. And maybe down the road, it'd be a great reason to have Ixchel back to talk about this again, because I talk a lot about time and we deal so much with time, mainly because I really wanted to help people learn how to rest better so that they could do their work in the world in a more supported way. And when I started, and then I realized this whole question of time is what got in people's way. I started asking, okay, so what's the thing that prevents you from taking care of yourself? And people almost always said time, but to a lesser extent, money. Those were the two they're right, which are interrelated, of course.
Yeah.
Right. And I just know from previous just experience that when people say time and money is the reason, there's something else underneath that.
Yep.
That's our go-to response, right? I don't have time. I don't have enough money. There's other things. And we're getting to the other things, I think, that are underneath that, like the cultural reasons. And that's why I've continued to do this research and learning and work. So I'm curious too for you in terms of how you continue to maintain that, unadrenalized state and prevent burnout again, how that's working for you. And one of the things I'm wondering about, and this may not be the case, so take us in a different direction if it's not, you have very clearly articulated values, especially ones about doing anti-racist work as what undergirds the work that you do with clients and with others. And I'm wondering if staying rooted in those values and the practices maybe that we've talked about are part of what fuels that, but I could be wrong. So please take us in a different direction if I'm off base.
So I have Capricorn moon on the midheaven. And so very much there's a Saturnian sort of boundaries that comes from knowing my values and holding strong to those values, so that I'm very clear in terms of what's important to me and the places that I'm going to help people go in the work that we're doing together. And so, yeah, for me, it's a little bit of boundary work in that way. It helps to filter people who are ready to do this work because, it does push people's buttons to start to confront colonization in all the ways that it shows up in our lives, and to be able to have a set of shared values when people understand what those values are and on paper they feel good. It's like a gut check for folks, right? And for folks where it's like, nope, that's out of my zone, out of my, out of bounds for me. They're going to go off and do something else. And that's fine. There's going to be somebody else who will be able to work with whatever they're working with, whether they know it or not.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, I love that idea of like your articulation of values as a boundary, right? A way of setting boundaries, right? You're not, and some of the circles I'm in with talk to other entrepreneurs, right? We talk about like, that's part of why we do articulate our boundaries is because we want to filter for the clients that are ready to work with us.
Yeah.
There's someone else for the other person, right? Meeting them
Yep.
in the space that they're in. Or I more flippantly sometimes say to people, I'm like, no one is for everybody.
Right.
Right. And it's more than just personality. It's also our values, and do those align? And I love that you so clearly articulate those and just woven throughout your website and your work that you put out in the world. So thank you for doing that and inviting us all in to doing that as well. So one of the things I really hope listeners get out of these podcasts is that I really want people to come away both with some really enriched by these big ideas that we've just been having a really delicious meal on right now. And these systems that we're deconstructing can feel really overwhelming, like you said, in those stages of decolonizing yourself. They're very difficult. So what is maybe one simple way, if people were going to start, or maybe an example from your own life, what is one simple way to rest or to begin to reclaim rest in their lives?
Yeah. I have been working with a framework for what rest is for quite a while based on a book. Let's see. I have an Instagram that I can share with you for the show notes so folks can look at it. Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith wrote a book called Sacred Rest. And in that book, there are 7 types of rest. And I think that understanding that there are different kinds of rest, because in order to get into flow, we need to rest. But what does that look like and feel like for anyone? Having a sense of like, what are the go-to ways of resting that you have? And maybe what's one way you can shift and try another one. So her 7 types of rest are physical, mental, sensory, creative, emotional, social, and spiritual. And so when you think about all those different ways, like sensory for me as an ADHD person, if I am overstimulated by all the senses, all the things, I need sensory rest in order to like really chill out and feel okay, right? It can show up in lots of different ways. And so thinking about those 7 ways, and then how can you start to become aware of which ones are really supportive, and maybe which ones have you never really even thought of? And maybe it's some of those ones you haven't thought about that you can start to play with. And then in terms of flow itself and really having that restorative recovery. So the flow cycle is rest, struggle, relax, flow, rest. And it just repeats, right? In order to really be able to drop into flow, you need the biochemistry, the neurochemistry to do that. It's very neurochemistry intensive. And so we need to be able to have those reserves filled up. And then we need to be able to find relaxation. So figuring out what relational rest is for you, people, pets, place, and plants are kind of those 4 Ps that I highlight for folks, because that will help us with our serotonin and our oxytocin, which are so vital to actually feeling rested. And so being able to play with those, going out for a walk in nature, sitting with nature, playing with a pet, or hanging out with your loved one, those are all ways that can really be intensely restorative. And so those are the ones that I really like to highlight in terms of being able to find our way back to another flow state.
And I love you mentioning those. I also use Sandra Dalton Smith's book, and that framework I find useful. And when I teach from that, or I explain that idea of these multiple kinds of rest to people, they always discover something they do that they didn't consider rest.
Right?
It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I didn't think of that as rest, because it's not sleeping or vegging out on the couch watching TV or whatever, those things that we often go to as, oh, well, that's the thing that is rest. Well, no, there's like all these other things that are also rejuvenating to our systems. Yeah. One I remember really, this one just stuck with me for whatever reason. I was teaching a workshop, I think last spring, and I brought in that concept. And somebody had mentioned that, I think just the night before, that she had decided that she wanted to make hummus, and that she really likes pulling off the skins of them, which you don't have to do to make hummus, but it makes it, like smoother. And she's like, and that's so she's like, oh, that's like a meditative practice, like to, that slow, like I'm going to go one by one on these tiny chickpeas.
Sensory.
It's sensory.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a form of rest. And so that, anyway, that was one that stuck with me that someone brought up not too long ago. But almost everyone has an aha moment like that about something they do that they're like, they didn't think of it as restful. They just, it's just a thing that I do. Or it might even, like that, she could consider it an activity she's doing, right? That I'm cooking for myself, which is true, but you're also doing this part of the work that's renewing for you in other ways as well, not just the food that you're preparing for yourself. Yeah, I love that.
I love that.
So what are some ways that either you do or you might suggest that people resist in the times that we find ourselves in? And maybe that's in that post-activist way, right? What are some of those ways to resist? And again, there's nothing against showing up to a protest or taking part in a political campaign or things like that. But what are some other alternatives to that if that's not your game, or for that matter, that's not something we're going to do every day?
I really like to turn people and their ability to get into flow away from just work productivity flow into something that feels really beautiful for the case of it. Like creatively dropping into flow for knitting or going for that walk, playing with the dog, like whatever that is, flow for the sake of flow, because it is so restorative and it is so good for the body to be in a flow state. It's a natural birthright that we have. We wouldn't exist if it were not for flow, because we would have never learned how to find food. Like the joy of like going out and foraging is a flow state. And that is an evolutionary gift that we've been given. And we use it for capitalism ad nauseum. It's been so hijacked. And so to be able to find those restorative places of flow, I think is one of the biggest ways that we can resist the imperialist capitalist structures that are out there.
Yeah. Simply stepping out of that capitalist time, if you will, like stepping out of it and being in a different kind of time. I heard you talk about it. I think it's from your experience of moving to Nicaragua, talking about God time and government time.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
I heard that on another podcast that you had been on recently. And I was like, oh, I'm filing that away because that's so good that there's these two different kinds of time, and that an active resistance is stepping into that different kind of time. God time or whatever you want to call it, right? Or a state of flow.
Yeah, because we were talking about time zones before this call.
Yeah.
And that's so much government time, right?
Totally.
That's like the way that we have to, with the clock time, like be on with our time zones. Everything, has to be in sync. And the way that folks here in Mexico talk about God time, which you can expand your idea of what God time means to be, more cosmological. If God doesn't resonate, it's just the term that they use here. And I think that is what really helps them to resist those government colonial kinds of structures. And I am just in awe of the many ways that the Indigenous folks here will resist all of that. So I love that one.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. So and speaking of time, I am so grateful for yours. And there's a couple more questions I want to ask and say lots of thank yous for your time. So you've already heard me say today that I sometimes refer to folks in my community and hopefully the listeners that will be here as rest rebels, that this is an act of rebellion. And so if you were going to write them a note or speak them a note today and say, "Dear rest rebels," like what would you have to tell them?
I love that. Yeah, I wrote a little note. Dear rest rebels, you're not behind. You're not failing. You're living in a moment that asks for new rhythms. Time is not your enemy. Just remember how to listen. Yeah.
I'm going to go back and listen to that. I might put that on a loop, honestly, and put that on in my own place.
Make
we
a
all
mantra.
need the reminder, like a mantra, exactly, like a reminder that way is possible and that you're not behind. You're where you need to be. So yeah, thank you for that. That was beautiful. And so one of the other things I would love to ask is there an organization doing good work out there in the world that you would like to highlight? I will give a small donation to them as a thank you for your time today. And I'll also I'm going to keep a collection of all of these great orgs that people recommend and make a section on the podcast website that gives links and encourages people to donate time or money or highlight their work. So whose work might you lift up today?
The organization that I tithe to is Mayan League. They're both doing political work and on the ground Indigenous solidarity. So they are helping to create translators for all the folks that have been trying to migrate to the United States and managing that chaos of getting over the border and either being in the United States or being stuck on the Mexico side typically. And then they do a lot of policy work in Washington, D.C. around those issues as well. So I love them because of the work that they're doing in the world is so vital. Mm-hmm. For folks that aren't too familiar with the challenges of migration, so many of the folks that have been migrating due to climate collapse, lands being taken away from them in Mexico and Central America and even South America to some extent. Yeah. They come with Spanish, but a lot of them come with their own indigenous languages. And that need is very difficult when they're facing border control and all those kinds of things where the only thing they're going to be offered is Spanish, but they don't maybe even know Spanish. And so the work that Mind League's doing around translation for those folks is such a huge piece for them to be able to navigate those challenges. So I think they're just an amazing organization.
Yeah, I am more than happy to lift that good work up and for myself learn a little bit more about what they're doing too. That's so comforting to be able to offer someone their own native language and help them navigate a system now that is completely foreign and
so hostile. Yeah.
Yeah, foreign and
when people
hostile.
Are getting
right.
deported to countries they don't even belong to or have left because their lives have been threatened and things like that.
Yeah.
To be able to communicate why they're doing this.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to take another moment to thank you once again for, I don't take it for granted because our time and our energy is what it is. And for you to have given that a little bit of that to have a conversation with me and for others to learn from you and all the wisdom that you've gleaned from all this tremendous work that you've done in the world. So thank you, Ixchel, for being here. I'm so grateful, and I hope this is the first of many conversations. I hope this isn't the last.
I'd love to come back.
Of course. Thank you so much for being here today. Deeply appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Remember, rest is not a retreat from the work we do in the world. It is the work. So if you're ready to rest and resist, here's what to do next. If you know someone who's running on empty, please share it with them. Hit subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss a single episode. Rate and review us so that other radicals can find us. Consider joining us on Substack at defythetrend.substack.com, where you'll find bonus content, tips for everyday living, community connection, and resources to keep you grounded. Radicals, remember, you are worthy of rest.